Go to Representative Zamaripa.
Mr. Chair, I move to adjourn this joint committee based on the fact that nearly 4,000 Wisconsinites have died due to the COVID pandemic. And we, the legislature, have not, the Republican-led legislature has not met in 241 days to address this pandemic that is killing our people. This hearing is a sham. It's an embarrassment. And you have muted the Democrats the entire time. And let me remind you, you again started your expert testimony with a radio DJ. This hearing is a sham. Let the public know you have not let the Democrats have the floor. We are walking out.
All right, Representative Zamaripa, first, I don't believe there's anything wrong with the profession of being a DJ. And second, I don't think he claimed that that was his profession. But moving on for an actual question, I hope, for Mr. Dragotta, we can go to Representative Sanfilippo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I think my concern in this whole matter is it seems that there's a pervasive law breaking that's happening, and it's not the electorate broadly per se, but it's from the officials who are entrusted to run our elections cleanly and fairly. And I think that's where my concern is. As a legislator, we got to make sure that the laws we pass are being followed. Can you kind of walk us through the process? I mean, you have extensive experience, obviously, working at the polls. Where is the breakdown in that? Because I've spoken with you in the past, and I have constituents who have worked at polls in my district that have called me with some very disturbing information. But where are we? What is the process if a poll watcher, or even just a poll worker, somebody who's working there, observes something wrong? What's the process to appeal that decision when they feel the law is being broken, and how do we get the laws to be enforced? Because I think that seems to be where this is the direction that we are maybe headed as a committee is, we pass laws. There's a process in place that if the Election Commission or anybody else feels that the laws that are in place are hampering voting matters, there's a process, a very clear process in place for them to come to the legislature and have the legislature change the laws. I think that this problem of having committee appointed board members or employees or staffers of agencies on their own deciding what laws to be followed and what laws are not going to be followed, that's where the problem is coming in, because then you have problems where you have some communities that are operating by the letter of the statutes and others are not. And now you're creating this unfairness amongst the electorate because some people are given extra chances that other people in the state are not. And what we want to do is create a fair process that is administered statewide.
Well, I would agree with your statement, and I would say that it was an interesting open records request with the documents that I received from the old Government Accountability Board. This body may not know it, but administrative organizations are very, very partisan. I can tell you that of the people that I work with on a regular basis that are interested in election integrity, whenever we have attempted to bring about or identify a potential issue at a polling location, the first step is to talk to the chief election inspector. The chief is the head at that polling location. If that fails and we're not getting results, then we go to the clerk. If that fails, then we contact the Election Commission. Through the open records request that I had made and that I'd reviewed, and I believe I have much of that still available, you will find that whenever a conservative has contacted the Government Accountability Board or WEC, that we've been targeted. I will give an example. In one instance, the staff of the Government Accountability Board, instead of looking into the accusation, did some research on the person that was calling the Government Accountability Board and was joking about some book that she had written. Nothing was mentioned about the accusation, what was done to resolve the claim by that person. So contrary to what Commissioner Knutson had said this morning, I do not believe that we have people within the Wisconsin Election Commission, most of which are holdovers from the Government Accountability Board. I don't believe that turning over information to WEC today is going to get the results that Mr. Knudsen claims will happen. I think one of the reasons why so very few people contact WEC is because they know that WEC won't do anything. WEC is part of the problem, not part of the solution. So again, I would agree that this body needs to look at limiting the authority of the administrative organizations and look at the detail necessary to administer honest and fair elections for everyone and not rely upon administrative rule making or administrative folks to do that.
All right, one last question for Senator Strobel.
Yes, I think it's a well-known fact that Mark Zuckerberg, the originator of Facebook. It's a well-known fact about Mark Zuckerberg that he spent $6.2 million in the state of Wisconsin for get out the vote efforts in Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha. Now, when you were talking to the people in Milwaukee and it indicated that because of lack of funds or what have you, they weren't able to necessarily fulfill their duties, did they ever bring up the huge amount of cash that they received from Zuckerberg in order to assist with their voting efforts?
No, none of that was ever part of the discussion. Obviously, my belief is that they just were not trained properly and that their process is designed in order to get through as many voters as is possible, regardless of what the statutes indicate.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you for your testimony. We're going to move on to
Point of order.
Ethan Pease.
Point
Go
of
ahead.
order, Ms. Chairman, again. We've heard a lot of this testimony disparaging our clerks and our poll workers and now civic servants who are patriots. And yet you have what we call, again, a hearing that's an investigation. Is this an investigative hearing? This is what you started with, calling this.
This is a public hearing.
You
and
call
you are the
this an
sixth Democrat to
investigative hearing.
speak just during this one witness's testimony within the 20 minutes. You're the sixth Democrat to be called on.
It's just public hearing on the notice.
It's a public hearing.
You
We
called
had a
this
notice. You saw it.
so please tell me. That's what I'm asking you because then you stated improperly at the beginning of your statements that this was an investigative hearing.
Wrong. I used the word investigate because we are investigating. That is not
Well,
just.
we are- either
it's
we
not
are or
used
we
as a
aren't.
noun. It is not used as a verb.
Either we are or we aren't. And
This
I
is
am-
a public hearing.
And we have I'm just surprised,
All
Madam
right, I've
Chair,
answered your question. Thank you very much.
That you're not speaking up to defend the integrity of our clerks and our poll workers that I know you have worked with for years in your life, in your career.
Okay, so, may I? Speaker Voss had requested a hearing. Our notice says it's a public hearing. But in order to get through a great deal of information in regard to concerns about the electoral process, we had to set some parameters on that. I was a county clerk. I have been making notes about what I may want to address or consider or talk about. When I was a county clerk, I didn't even know the party affiliation of most of my county clerk colleagues, except for Mr. Parisi. He always made it very evident that he was a Democrat from Madison. But the rest of us had a job to do. And I recognize that most of us who ran elections and who continue to work in the electoral process do the best we can. But that's not to say that there isn't some issues which we are here to listen to today and to be open to making our system, our process better. So I don't need to be heard on every issue. I don't need to question everything people say. I'm taking notes, and I am making sure that we do follow through and address many of these concerns and find out what's fact and what is fiction. So I don't feel a need to comment on everything.
And if there's parameters, then we could have allowed 15 minutes with 10 minutes questions, or 10 minutes and 10 minutes, but there's no area just for questions, and we are left, for the most part, until this gentleman came up, with no time for asking questions. How are we to again, and they won't, and we aren't asking them to take an oath, and I'd ask this gentleman, would you be willing to solemnly, sincerely, truly swear, declare, and affirm that the testimony you just gave in this matter is all truth? From what I hear, you're just giving conjecture and your opinion of what you think people are actually up to.
Mr. Dragota, you don't have to answer that question. Your testimony is already concluded.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should let Mr. Dragota answer that question, because this isn't hearsay. This is a guy who just testified to us that he spent 20 years working at the polling places. I don't know how many days you've worked at a polling place, Senator, but we should listen to the people who are actually there. I've worked at a central count location in my jurisdiction, and I can tell you how we've operated is within the confines of the law and sounds drastically in contradiction to what I hear is going on in Milwaukee. So that means my constituents who are held to the letter of the law are being put at a disadvantage to people in Milwaukee who are being allowed to not follow the law. And I don't blame the citizens. Again, I want to make this perfectly clear. We have pervasive law breaking going on by the very people entrusted to run our elections fair and square. And I hope this sets your mind at ease, but I have pushed for an investigative hearing. I want people subpoenaed. I want people here testifying under oath, and I will continue to push for that, because I do believe that while the vast majority of the people working our elections are honest and doing a great job, there are some very bad people out there, and they need to be held accountable. From the stories that I've heard and the evidence I've seen, we have people that are engaging in malfeasance of office. And if it takes my last breath while I'm on this committee, I'm going to make sure that they're held accountable, because every citizen in this state is accountable to follow the statutes and the laws of this state. And just because you're an appointed official or an elected official doesn't mean you're allowed to break those laws. And some of the things that are going on here are terrible, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Very good. Mr. Pease.
And to make comments and jokes about people not coming to work when we haven't been in here for 241 days because the leadership has not called us in, and 4,000 people have died in this state, and we're wasting our time on hearsay and conjecture about elections instead of helping people who are sick and dying in this state is an embarrassment.
What's an embarrassment is the way the Democrats have exploited this tragedy for their political gain, and that's exactly what's happened here.
Okay, I'm going to cut it off there. We have plenty of people testifying today. One of the most important reasons why we have such a fast list of people and only 20 minutes to speak is because we have so many people that are waiting to testify. We're not going to get an opportunity to hear from all of them if we keep talking outside of hearing their testimonies. This is a public hearing. The point of a public hearing is to hear from the public. Mr. Pease, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan Pease. I am a Wisconsin native, was born in Madison and grew up in Partyville, Wisconsin, graduated from high school there in 2018. I'll just get right into it. During the run-up to and on Election Day, I was working as a temporary hire at United Mailing Services, a USPS subcontracting company in Madison, Wisconsin, located in the Stoughton Road area of Madison, if any of you are familiar. I began working there on August 26th of 2020 as a route driver and a box truck driver. This meant that my job was to pick up mail on a predetermined route that went through Cottage Grove, Windsor, and the Stoughton Road area of Madison around UMS. And then I would take this mail to UMS where it would be sorted and metered. And I would then take the sorted mail on the final box truck run to the USPS on Milwaukee Street in Madison, Wisconsin. In September or October, I began to deliver mail-in ballots from United Mailing Services to the USPS as part of my evening box truck run. I knew that I would be taking ballots because there would always be a mail cart marked for me for ballots only with a special green tag that said for ballots only. On one occasion, I forgot to retrieve the ballots from my nightly box truck run. Luckily, I had to take 2 trucks that night, so I got them on the second truck run. After that, though, I always made sure to get them because you don't want to take a box truck and have to go all the way back for one cart and then take it all the way back to the post office. It's about a mile drive. On November 2nd, 2020, I noticed that there was only 1 ballot in the bin for delivery to USPS. And on November 3rd, Election Day, there were no ballots in the bin for delivery to USPS. I did not think of that as strange at the time. It was Election Day. The polls were closing that day. You'd think that the ballots would kind of trickle down and be done. So you guys can imagine my surprise that when on the next day, November 4th, a senior USPS employee, whose name I do know, had asked me if I'd forgotten any ballots the night before, election night. He explained to me that an order had come down from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of USPS that 100,000 ballots were missing. He then told me that his post office, the one at Milwaukee Street in Madison, Wisconsin, had dispatched employees to look for the missing ballots around 4 a.m. November 4th. He said, and I quote, around 4 a.m. And that only 7 or 8 ballots were found at United Mailing Services, my work. Based on my previous experience and habit of double checking for the ballots, I believe that to be a lie immediately. The following day, November 5th, 2020, I had a conversation with a different USPS employee, whose name I also know, in which she admitted that USPS employees were ordered to backdate ballots that were received too late to be lawfully counted. I asked this employee if I would be getting in trouble for those ballots the night before with my own boss, just kind of making sure that I was covered, because at first I did think perhaps I did miss ballots, but I couldn't have if they weren't on the cart where they're supposed to be. The employee said, no, I wouldn't, as long as they were postmarked for the 3rd. And then she hesitated for a moment and said that's why they had us do that, referring to USPS employees. I didn't bring any of this to the attention of the supervisors at the USPS at the time, due to what I perceived to be their hostility towards the president and their evident contempt of the law. I've heard those same employees make jokes about asking customers who came into the post office lobby, who did you vote for? Oh, President Trump? Okay. And then they would reference throwing the ballots directly into the trash. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Biden supporter. I voted for Joe Jordan's in this election, and I voted Libertarian in the Wisconsin governor's race in 2018, which was my first election that I could vote in. But I know that something wrong happened here, and I just want to see that something gets done about it for our state and for the people of our state, so that people can have faith in our elections. I think the American people and the people of Wisconsin have a right to know what happened. And the bottom line of this is, why was the USPS even looking for ballots on November 4th, hours after the polls closed at 8 p.m.? Thank you.
All right, Ethan, is there anything that you stated in your testimony that you would have changed or said differently had we given you an oath?
No.
Okay. All right, Representative Sortwell, go ahead.
I would like to say also that I have already signed a legally binding affidavit, so.
Very good.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony, sir. It's ironic because a lot of people like to yell at libertarians that they're throwing votes away, and yet you're here today to make sure that every vote is counted. and counted validly. And I want to applaud you for that.
Thank you.
The question I had is, you mentioned somebody earlier, and maybe this is in your sworn testimony, I haven't seen it, but you mentioned an employee of, I think you said it was of the USPS, told you that they were ordered to backdate ballots that came in after November 3rd. And I was wondering if that individual said anything about where those orders came from.
Like where the ballots
Yeah,
actually come
no,
from?
the orders to backdate them. So did that come from a direct supervisor? Was that person aware of it coming from even higher up? Is there anything more about when that person said, we were ordered to backdate them? Was there more to that?
All that I was told was that it came down as an order from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of the USPS. So I would assume that that is a top-down order.
Okay. All right, that's all for now. Thank you.
All right, next we have Senator Bernier.
Thank you for being here. Nice to see young people engaged in the electoral process. So in Wisconsin, our law is that the ballots need to be received by the close of Election Day at 8 p.m. So if the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of the United States Postal Service backdated ballots on the 4th, which was the day after, where were they delivered? They couldn't legally be counted anyway. Do you happen to know where they were delivered?
All that I know is that when I would take the ballots to the post office, they would be loaded onto usually the 8:30 truck that would go to Milwaukee. And from there, I do not know where it would go.
Okay, so there may be no way to track where those ballots went and where they were filed, unless maybe we can get somebody from the Milwaukee Election Commission to comment on it, which may or may not work.
The USPS also has extensive security cameras at all of their loading docks and their facilities. So if a proper investigation is done into this, then all of that should be able to be found.
And each ballot envelope does have a tracking mechanism as well. Okay, so any unofficial, question to you, and it's more, I want to know your opinion. It seems the United States has a culture issue in regard to conservatives versus liberals, which, since you're a young person, do you think that this cancel culture thing has crept its way into the United States Postal Service, and that they feel an obligation to cancel out conservative voices versus liberal voices? From your testimony, I glean that. But you are in that culture, and I want to know your opinion on that, and if that is what seems to precipitate their behavior here. If you can just let us know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, based on the jokes that they had made to me, as well as I'm very open about my political views. I'm not ashamed to admit I'm a libertarian. I consider myself independent. And I have been open with that about my coworkers at the time at UMS and USPS. People were pretty dismissive of it, and they said things like one of you said, sometimes people see that as throwing their vote away, and I've been told that millions of times. So I guess just based on that, there's definitely a contempt just between anybody's political parties. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, in the middle, libertarian. If you have different views, people look at you differently.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Ethan, for testifying today. So how long have you been an employee of the Postal Service?
I began my job as a temporary hire for United Mailing Services through the temp agency Strategic Resources on August 26th. my last day of work with them was November 5th.
This didn't have anything to do with you being, not working there? I mean, your affidavit or anything, did that cause problems at work for you?
No,
Okay.
I've actually heard nothing from them or the temp agency when I've reached out to ask why I was terminated.
Who did you file your affidavit with?
Do
Do
you mean like who was
Yeah,
it
who
sent
was-
to?
Yeah, who was it given to?
I made a formal complaint with the Office of Inspector General.
Okay. And just one last thing, how do you feel about the security of the U.S. Postal Service as it applies to voting, as far as, postmarks being an official date and time, and that sort of thing?
As someone who got to directly see how the ballots were moving through the system, mail-in ballots, I voted in person. I didn't want to take any chances with my ballot getting lost or just anything happening to it with the lengthy chain of custody that I've seen firsthand. So I voted here in Madison, Wisconsin. I won't say my polling place. I don't want to give away where I was living.
Thank you.
All right, very good. I don't see any other questions. We still have some time left. All right, but seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it very much. And we're going to go to our next person, who is Eric Cardell. And sorry, I'm going to repeat this. We're going to go to our next witness, which is Eric Cardell and Phil Kline. Go ahead, sir, when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Phil Kline. I am the director of the Amistad Project for the Thomas More Society out of Chicago, which has been concerned about election integrity for 2 years now. And additionally, I'm former Attorney General of Kansas, a former state legislator, and a former district attorney, and currently serving as assistant professor of law at Liberty University School of Law. And I appreciate your time and interest in this proceeding. From where we sit, we witnessed an unprecedented and coordinated infusion of private funds, as well as a private-public partnership in all swing states to improperly and unlawfully impact the result of the 2020 presidential election. And I will provide you some additional information regarding that during this testimony. But first, I'd like to address what I have witnessed during the testimony, which is consistent with the concerns that have arisen as we've watched this election, and that is the deconstruction of truth through the deconstruction of the definition and meaning of words, such that the result is lawlessness, and the mandates of this legislature are not respected nor followed through that deconstruction of words. I witnessed in, and you'll have to forgive me, I forget the new name, but in Michigan, in the Cobo Center, in the Consolidated Counting Center, the exclusion of one party from being able to witness the counting of the ballots, the handling of the ballots, and the curing of ballots, with the justification that although Michigan law requires that representatives of both political party be present at the place of the counting, that the Republican who was placed in the cheap seats in a hall that is over 2 football fields long and could not see what is actually occurring with the handling of the ballots, complied with the law because he was in the place. To which I say, Detroit is a place. The planet Earth is a place. Clearly, the purpose of the law was to prevent fraud through a prophylactic measure of allowing both political parties to witness the management, the handling, and the counting of ballots. In fact, the United States Agency for International Development states that it monitors foreign elections for transparency. so that all of those who have a political interest may witness the handling, the counting, and the management and receipt of ballots. America, the United States, did not have a transparent election in any form and in any manner in every location that funds from Mr. Zuckerberg touched. And in fact, the plans that were initiated through his funds that were mandated by a charity to which he gave $350 million required that these elections be managed in that fashion. We can't privatize elections. Elections are a core government function, and government should not put its thumb on the scale to dictate who may turn out to vote more easily while suppressing the vote of other demographics throughout the nation. And that is exactly what happened this time. Here I saw the testimony of Mr. Knudsen, who told you that he could not determine what the statute meant that a voter delivering an absentee ballot must deliver it to the clerk, that it was too vague, that perhaps it was somebody other than the voter, or perhaps it was even delivering the vote to an object, like a drop box, rather than a person. Well, clearly the words of the statute and the purpose of the statute indicate that the vote should be delivered to a human being in order to be able to validate the legitimacy of the vote. I find it I'm incredulous with the argument that that statute can mean you could deliver a ballot to an object and it would verify its authenticity. The deconstruction of words has resulted in lawlessness in this election. I've had the occasion to visit the National Archives. I've had the honor, as perhaps many of you have had, in viewing our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, which is kept in a vault, because it is so fragile that if it is exposed to oxygen, it will turn to dust. It cannot stop a bullet. It cannot protect the American people. It cannot ensure that our elections are transparent, inclusive, and accurate unless the words in that document resonate in the heart of a people. And when we destroy the meaning of words, we destroy the precious protections that we have in our Constitution and in law. One of those most precious protections is equality before the law. The Amistad Project got involved when it started to see the perpetual use of emergency police powers for certain executives to use those police powers to no longer declare themselves as part of the lawmaking process, but to say they are the law. What they get up in the morning and decide is the law. And they lost faith, apparently, in the democratic process. Because you representatives and senators are not in a bunker, you're not incapacitated, you can operate and function, and our Constitution mandates a separation of powers to protect the individual liberties of each and every citizen. And when those powers are breached, and one person claims that they can determine what the law is, all persons suffer. And if you look across our nation right now, these laws which control every aspect of human behavior, whether you can visit a loved one in the hospital, whether you have to be 6 feet or 5 feet 11 inches away from another human being, whether your mask covers your nose and your mouth, are unenforceable because no police force is large enough to do so. And so they're being enforced against those who raise their voice against these actions, and that is arbitrary and capricious application of law. This started to occur in the election process. First in March of 2020, with a launch of litigation primarily initiated by organizations tied to the left to eviscerate protections of the absentee ballot and its integrity. They attacked witness requirements. They attacked even delivering the election or the ballot to the clerk. They claimed that drop boxes were mandated by the Constitution. And soon afterwards, in March of 2020, a man by the name of David Plouffe published a book called The Citizen's Guide for Defeating Donald Trump. That guide, by the way, and David Plouffe was the former campaign manager of President Obama. At the time, he was working for Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan. And in that book, he said that this election will be determined by a block-by-block street fight to turn out the vote in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. Soon afterwards, and I'd ask if we can put the chart on the, this is my daughter Jacqueline. I'm here on behalf of Got Freedom, which is a C4 that she runs. So thank you for paying for this trip, Jacqueline. I appreciate it. And here is a chart. And Mr. Chairman, we will be pleased to supplement this. By the way, this is evidence. This is evidence. I think there's a misunderstanding of evidence. If I have a subpoena, and I oversaw the Kansas Bureau of Investigation for a while, to subpoena, I'm sorry, Senator Darling, to use you as an example, that I believe that you're evading taxes, and I believe that you have documents at your home, and I have a search warrant, and I show up on a sunny day, 95 degrees, I'm sweltering hot outside, you bar the door and I see smoke coming from the chimney, that's evidence that the documents are disappearing. So we don't need to necessarily step in there, but it is amazing that those who have the evidence are saying, don't worry, there's no fraud here, rather than revealing the evidence to the American people. Well, this is evidence. We have tracked thus far over $500 million to flow through private organizations from the funders on the top level, including $500 million from Mr. Zuckerberg and his charities alone, that flow into various 501c organizations that have initiated unique contracts with government to obtain sensitive information of citizens, as well as to dictate how your elections are to be run. Now, I have to say that under the United States Constitution and the Electors Clause and the Elections Clause, that responsibility rests with you, not cities, not counties, which are creatures of the state, but with you. In fact, you prepare an election plan every election, and you submit it to the federal government for approval of the receipt of funds under the Help America Vote Act. Under the federal law, you must provide that plan in a way that provides equal protection for all voters. That's the primary concern with fair elections, that every vote have equal weight. And so it requires you to disperse those funds based on a formula of the number of voters within a jurisdiction, so that all voters will be treated equally, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of political affiliation or personal belief. You submit, and it is received and approved, and you received those funds to administer this election. Your cities receiving Mr. Zuckerberg's funds, and I'm going to refer to it that way, because if I gave $350 million to a charity, I have a right to call it after my name. Your cities that received these funds violated your plan intentionally. Now, I'm not here to speak about criminal law. I'll give some references to that in a minute. I'm speaking about violation of election laws, which was done willfully and intentionally. Laws that are there to protect the integrity of the election. In fact, your statutes specifically speak to this. I'm speaking to Wisconsin Law Section 6.84, subsection 1, that this is provided to prevent the potential for fraud. You recognize that if these laws are not followed, you are unable to determine if fraud occurred. In other words, the potential for fraud is the key standard you must assess in determining under the Constitution whether to certify the election. It's the media that has said you must prove fraud. No law. No law. I have prosecuted fraudsters. And let me tell you, it takes a long time to prove it. And you only convict after you have enough information to get one of them to confess. Because you can't prove a state of mind. Sometimes you can circumstantially. If I had a gun and I pointed it at the chairman and I pulled the trigger and said, oops, I didn't know what a gun did, circumstantially you would determine my intent and I would be convicted of murder. But this type of fraud, you can't prove the intent unless somebody confesses. That is a false standard for the exercise of your responsibilities. Your responsibilities are thus: was the election lawful? You have ample evidence, and I would say not just evidence, you have admissions by those who operated this election that they did not do it lawfully, consistent with your design, your plan, and your law. The second question is, do you have faith in the result? And if you do not, I would say your legal obligation is not to certify and either send 2 sets of electors or send no electors. And by the way, the Constitution does not mandate December 8th, nor December 14th. Those are congressional statutes. They don't override your plenary power and responsibility under the United States Constitution to get to the bottom of this matter. So, let me give you examples of the flow of Mr. Zuckerberg's money, and then I'm going to back up to some more evidence. And these are through admissions of the Center for Tech and Civic Life that he poured the money into. And there's a flaw here, by the way, a flaw in that they are a private organization, so they're not subject, like you are, to freedom of information requests, to demands for them to open. And so the information I am providing you is what we've been able to scratch and claw and obtain. Mr. Zuckerberg's grants. The CTCL started to reach out to Wisconsin as early as April of 2020. By May, they had reached out directly to the mayor of Racine, and they told him, we will give you a $100,000 grant. That at the time, based on previous 990 filings, would be about 10% of their entire annual budget. And they told him, you are to keep 60,000 of these funds. Then you're to reach out to the mayor of Green Bay, the mayor of Kenosha, the mayor of Milwaukee, and I'm forgetting the 5th city right now. I'm getting word of mouth. You guys know about this. And so there were 5. And you're to give them $10,000 so that they can prepare a Wisconsin-safe election plan. In other words, these 5 cities preparing their own Wisconsin state election plan without any coordination, cooperation, or involvement of the rest of Wisconsin. So they started to prepare this plan to receive additional funds from the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which, again, Mark Zuckerberg is not given to, but it's obvious that the pipeline was going to be opened because they were asking people to obtain funds they did not yet have. Through that, your cities prepared this election plan. Within that plan, they established the provision of drop boxes. Now, it's mighty interesting in that the chain of custody of the ballot is one of the prime considerations in any state law or regulation that ensures the protection and accuracy of the vote. You must maintain a chain of custody of the ballot. If you look at every one of your laws, you will see that focus as vitally important in the application of that law. Yet where is your chain of custody on the millions of ballots that were placed in drop boxes? Where is the video? Where are the logs that show who picked them up and where they took them and what time they were picked up and what time they arrived? To act consistent with your laws, they should have had a 2-person per key system, such that Johnny, who may be a young Republican, wouldn't pick up ballots in a Democrat precinct and accidentally lose several on the way to these consolidated counting centers. Or if Billy, who might be an activist with Black Lives Matters, picks up ballots in a predominantly Republican area and might accidentally lose some on the way to the polling places. Where is your chain of custody? It was promised to you. It was mandated. In any of these states where Mr. Zuckerberg's monies arrived, they have not been provided by Georgia, by Pennsylvania, by Arizona, by Wisconsin, or by Michigan. That raises serious concerns. Drop boxes, as you know, are inconsistent with statute, despite Mr. Knutson's torture of the meaning of the word clerk. The clerk is not an object, clearly. So, that is deeply concerning with your election. And as a result, you have an error rate in the treatment of ballots that greatly exceeds the tolerance of the error rate under federal law. Your election system, if looked at in hindsight, would not be certified under federal law because of all of these errors. And I haven't even gotten to the indefinitely confined. Or if you read the Wisconsin Safe Election Plan prepared by these 5 cities, contrary to your direction, contrary to your plan, in violation of the plan accepted by HAVA, you will find that they identify voter ID as a burden, as an obstacle to be overcome. And they did that unlawfully by directing first a member of the Wisconsin Election Committee stating, treat all voters as indefinitely confined because of COVID. It took your Supreme Court in March to tell them that's not the law. And the next thing that occurred is a directive not to question whether people were indefinitely confined. Well, I have to tell you, we did question it. And we reviewed social media of those who were reported as being indefinitely confined. And believe me, they were celebrating Halloween. They were going out and doing things. They were not indefinitely confined. Your indefinitely confined absentee ballots rose. And I'm speaking, if the gentleman were to ask me to swear to it, this is the best of my memory. I'm sorry. I don't have an encyclopedic memory, but you can check it out. From about 70,000, I think, to over 250,000 in this election. 250,000 people who are submitting ballots contrary to your direction that they provide identification on those ballots. Can you have faith in the result when such laws are ignored and such ballots are counted and cast despite the law? And that is also true with the curing of ballots and absentee ballots, the completion on the envelope of information where your law clearly states that ballot is not to be counted, but it was cured. Now, I will ask this of you, if you will indulge me. I'm going to take one example in Pennsylvania, and we are still developing the numbers in Wisconsin. The flow of Mr. Zuckerberg's money. Delaware County, Pennsylvania received substantial dollars. They established with his money 1 drop box for every 4 square miles, 1 drop box for every 4,000 voters. That's 2 miles by 2 miles square. That's a place to vote within walking distance of your home. This is all occurring, by the way, with many governors suspending and sidestepping state law regarding the number of in-person polling places required by law, consolidating those places, and reducing opportunities to vote in person. You can look at any polling throughout this election, and you will see that one party prefers to vote in person. One party prefers to vote absentee in advance. I will say this, that government putting its thumb on the scale to increase turnout of one demographic is the opposite side of the same coin as government putting its thumb on the scale to suppress one demographic from voting. It's the same thing. You can't treat persons or groups differently despite identity politics and cancel culture. Our rights are intrinsic, not offered by you. They're to be protected by you. And when government gets in the game through Mr. Zuckerberg's funds of treating groups of people differently, it violates a basic tenet of American law that we all should hold fast to as a protection of individual liberty. So in Delaware County, 1 drop box for every 4 square miles. In the 59 counties the President Trump won, 1 drop box for every 1,159 square miles. So in Pennsylvania, the state said, if you're in a Democrat area, we'll come pick up your ballot or walk to the corner. In the counties that Trump won, go on a weekend vacation and find Waldo. It's similar here in Wisconsin because of the infusion of these funds. And I will add this. Mr. Zuckerberg wasn't satisfied with suggesting these grants require the funds to be expended as they dictate or in the sole discretion of the Center for Tech and Civic Life. They recapture all of those funds. You had a billionaire in the counting room and America was kicked out. Those funds funded the election workers. They funded the people who boarded up the windows in Michigan. They funded the election judges in Pennsylvania. And they funded your election designed by these cities contrary to your law. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking.
Very good. And our 20 minutes has expired, so we do not have time for additional questions. We are going to go on to our next speaker. Thank you for your time testifying. Sure, if you guys could connect, that would be great. Thank you. All right, so next we have Karen. Oh, wait a second. We have a point of order before we move on.
I just have a point of order. Senator Carpenter here is absolutely welcome to be here, but he's got his timer on audio, and it's going off, and it's irritating. And I have no problem with him timing and second-guessing what you're doing. That's certainly his right to do it. But he's doing it audibly, and it's driving me crazy. And can we instruct him to not have that going off like that?
Sure, why don't we just... 20 minutes is 20. He's not a member of the committee. He's not allowed to talk. Yeah, let's just... How about everybody, please silent your phones under any circumstance or any other timing device or anything that you have. Just please do it over, please do whatever you're doing
I
silently.
think he's trying to time how many signatures he can put on his papers in 20 minutes.
All right, let's move on to our next witness. That is Karen Mueller. Is Karen appearing via Zoom? Yes. Okay, Karen is appearing via Zoom, so.
Hello. Thank you to each of the members of this Joint Committee on Elections for holding this hearing today and for allowing me to testify. My name is Karen Mueller. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in Wisconsin. I'm not an election law attorney, and I claim no expertise in this area before the November 3rd election this year. I'm here to testify in the hopes that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can live in peace and freedom. And for that reason, I want to ensure that we have free, safe, secure, and transparent elections in Wisconsin, because it is the only way that we can ensure that we have liberty in this state and in this country. It is only by having elections that we can all trust that we can keep anarchy at bay. This is, in fact, the truth that the other 18 states, led by Texas, understand, and why they are now suing the state of Wisconsin along with Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Michigan. We in Wisconsin have broken our contract with them to ensure that we follow our own election laws so that the citizens of the United States of America can together have confidence that when we hold a presidential election, that everyone, even if your candidate loses, understands that the will of the people in our constitutional republic have fairly elected that person. But before we can fix what is broken, we must recognize that there is a problem with our elections. I submit to you today that there is a threshold question before you regarding the issue that I want to talk about, which is, again, the ballot drop boxes. And that question is simply, do we have a monarchy in this state when it comes to election laws? And if so, is that what we want to keep? Because when unelected state officials can speak or write into law what they wish the law to be, then we no longer have actual laws. We have edicts, we have whims, we have dictates of the people that are in control. I have voted in every presidential election since I was old enough to vote, which is just under 50 years. But never in my whole life have I believed that an election was so radically compromised until now. It was immediately after the election that my husband and I first started hearing about absentee ballot drop boxes that were set up in Milwaukee. We wondered where they had come from since neither of us had ever heard of the use of ballot drop boxes in a Wisconsin election. As an attorney, I know that in order to research this question of legality, I needed to start with the statutes. I found nothing under absentee voting that mentioned the use of ballot drop boxes. But the more that I read the statutes, the more that I became convinced that these drop boxes were not legal under Wisconsin law. The legislature has made it very clear in the Wisconsin election statutes that voting is a fundamental right, but that absentee voting is a privilege because of the higher opportunity and the likelihood for fraud or cheating. I've heard people say that just because these ballot drop boxes were not mentioned in the statutes, that it does not mean that they could not be legal. But that assessment is incorrect because the statutes are very clear regarding absentee voting. If you don't follow the processes and procedures that are laid out in the statutes, you cannot count the ballot. So how did these ballot boxes come into existence? On August 19th, the Wisconsin Election Commission sent out a letter to all 72 county election officials. I call that document Exhibit 1. I have a copy of it right here. I apologize, I don't have a copy sent to you. This is a copy of it. It says that it is from Megan Wolf, Administrator, and Richard Rydecke, Assistant Administrator, but I don't know who actually prepared the document, so I want to make that clear. So the document encouraged the county clerks to set up ballot drop boxes in their communities. And at the subject line, it says absentee ballot drop box information. So the document encouraged not only the county clerks to set up the ballot drop boxes, but it even suggested that clerks partner with libraries in order to use their book return slots, or also with private companies that had payment drop boxes. The document informs the reader that it originated from a model guideline document from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency called CISA. And that document I also have right here. CISA is an agency, a sub-agency of the United States Department of Homeland Security. You may have heard of that organization recently because President Donald Trump, I believe it was 3 weeks ago or maybe 4 now, fired the director who was Chris Krebs. Anyway, this is the model guideline, and I call that Exhibit 2, ballot drop box. This one came from CISA. This document came from WEC. Much of what is in the documents is the same. The fact that struck me very odd and what I was concerned about and became very curious about as I dug deeper was that it made no sense to me why an agency of the federal government would be meddling, that's what it looked like to me, into Wisconsin election laws. What I found next was that the name of the National Conference of State Legislators, NCSL, was also in this original guideline document. And on page 3, at the bottom, here is the National Conference of State Legislators. I found that this model guideline had been pushed first out from CISA, and then apparently it went through NCSL. There was certainly a relationship there, and somehow it ultimately arrived at the Wisconsin Election Commission, where it was modified. I was disturbed to find out that whoever had created the WEC document from the CISA guideline document left out what I would consider the most important paragraph in the whole guideline regarding the safety, security, and transparency of the ballot drop boxes. Now, attorneys normally do this. You can take a statute, basically a boilerplate statute, and then you take out what you want and you maybe put in other things that you want in. But what was very disturbing was what did not get into the WEC document. And in that area, this top portion I'm going to show you, this was left out. I'll read it for you. It says election night and closing boxes. You need to give special consideration to returning temporary ballot drop boxes and locking permanent drop boxes on election night. Organizing teams from other county or city departments is one way to accomplish this. Essentially, you need bipartisan teams to be at every ballot drop-off location precisely when the polls close. Their responsibilities include identifying the voter or the car in line at the time polls close and ensuring that they have the opportunity to deposit the ballots, retrieving the temporary indoor boxes and returning them to the counting facility, locking the drop slot in the 24-hour boxes and transferring ballots to a ballot transfer bag or box and returning them to the counting facility, and completing chain of custody forms. This one was very disturbing to me, and because it does speak to the state of mind of whoever drafted the wet document. Because what it appears that bipartisan teams was not to be emphasized in this wet document, and the other instructions that would have helped to give more guidance to the election clerks in the local counties to stress the importance of security was not put into this second document. So that's what I wanted to say about that. About the same time after this election that I was looking into these ballot boxes, I read Dan O'Donnell's report on other areas where WEC had allegedly ended fair elections in Wisconsin through other questionable directives. That was kind of the title of the piece that he had written that I read about. I won't go into those issues today because he has already testified and I believe he covered them. But I just wanted to point that out, that was kind of an impetus for me to keep digging and to find out what in the world was going on. But on November 27th, I decided, along with my husband, to file suit on his behalf as a voter in this election. And I filed a petition of original action with the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And what I alleged was that the over 500 ballot drop boxes that were placed throughout the state of Wisconsin were illegal because there was no legislative action that brought them into existence. You need to know that there were 15 ballot drop boxes in Milwaukee alone. 13 of them were at public libraries. But I would guess that most of you would be shocked to know that there were over 500. And I do have a document, excuse me for a minute while I grab it. Okay, I can't grab it right now. Anyway, it's about a ½ inch thick and it lists the locations of every one of where those ballot drop boxes was placed in the state of Wisconsin. So in the petition for original action, I placed only questions of law before the court. And I did that because I wanted to make sure that they didn't have to get into factual determinations. And so I asked, under Wisconsin laws, are the ballot boxes legal or illegal? And if it turns out that they ruled that they were illegal, then my next question was the ballots that were placed within them illegal? But on December 2nd, the Wisconsin Supreme Court dismissed our case without stating a reason. However, the 3 dissenting justices joined in a one-line statement, and they said the court cannot continue to shirk its institutional responsibilities to the people of Wisconsin. I believe that this case is about systemic election fraud, where the federal government, for whatever reason, a rogue agency, I'm not sure what's going on, that would take a lot more investigation than I'm capable of doing, through ISA, apparently reached down through a private quasi-governmental organization of the National Conference of State Legislators, NCSL, or the National Association of Secretaries of States. And then they passed their model guidelines for absentee ballot drop boxes into the Wisconsin Election Commission, and where people within that organization basically made up a law. I don't know who did what. CISA and the people working with them at all levels of this enterprise also waged a propaganda campaign through the websites of the NCSL, NCSL and NASS. And finally, out to the media that told us to trust our election officials and not to spread disinformation and misinformation. These were.
All right, I don't mean to talk over her, but we are being shadow banned right now. YouTube is not showing that I am live. You wouldn't know I'm live unless you go directly to my channel and look for me. As I just showed you on the screen, with me being live on my own account, I am normally the first box on my feed saying I am live. You cannot see that I'm live unless you go all the way to my profile. So I have to shut this down. We will be down for 1 minute and then we will go back up. This is the only way I can get around being shadow banned. They will bury this feed so no one sees it. That's not going to work for me. So please subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell icon. Join the Discord to stay connected no matter what YouTube